So welcome, everyone. For those of you I have not yet met, I am Rabbi Rebecca Rosenthal. I am the Director of Youth and Family Education here at Central. Every once in a while, they let me out to speak to grown-ups too, and so very nice to be talking to you. My side hobby when I'm not uh, at my job or with my family is really a lot of civic engagement work, a lot of work around voting and trying to get people involved in the political process. And so when this project was put forward, I was like, definitely, I want to teach this. I want to teach in this Hineni project because I feel like it's some of the most important things that we can do as Americans is help people be civically engaged in our country. And so even if you're not in America, to be civically engaged in whatever country you are in. So we are going to be looking at George Washington's letter to the Jews of Newport, Rhode Island. I picked this letter because I think the questions around religious freedom are very, very interesting and are extremely interesting in light of what's happening in our country right now. So my hope is that over the course of this hour, as we explore this letter, as we look at some of the questions that Washington was asking and some of the images that he is putting forward in this letter, that we can think about how they speak to the moment that we're in and the world that we currently live in, because this letter is actually, my husband is an American history professor. And so I checked my American history facts with him before I came to talk to all of you. But one of the things that we were discussing about this letter is that this letter comes in between the ratification of the Constitution and the ratification of the Bill of Rights. So the First Amendment is not, it's out there, people have it and are seeing it, and it's basically in its finalized form by the time this letter comes, but it has not yet been officially ratified. And so I think that is also a really important piece of information to keep in mind when reading this letter, because in some way, there are arguments that Washington is making for the ratification of the Bill of Rights, which includes freedom of religion, and is something that as Jews in America is very, very important to us. And if it isn't, it should be very, very important to us. And we should ask ourselves how we are going to preserve our religious freedom as we vote and also as we advocate for ourselves as Jews in the world. So the context of this, and I will confess that this is a little joke that came from Rabbi Lorge, which is that when Washington is inaugurated, many religious groups send him letters of congratulations on his inauguration, and different religious denominations get together and they send one letter. The Jews cannot agree, per usual, so the Jews have to send multiple letters. Not every community, but a number of different communities send their own letters. The Jews of Newport, Rhode Island send this letter in response to Washington coming to visit their community in 1790. So see, even back in the beginning of the United States, the Jews could not get it together to speak with one voice. And so this is the letter of the Jews of Newport that we are looking at, but I think we can extrapolate at least some of the values to include the values of the rest of the Jewish community in the United States, but I cannot speak for them. They have their own letters. So that's really the background of this letter. If any of you have been to Newport, Rhode Island and gone to the Toro Synagogue, one of the oldest synagogues in the United States, you can learn a lot about this letter there. They are very proud of it, and they're very proud of their identity as one of these very old synagogues in the United States. And one of the reasons that, of course, synagogues were allowed to crop up in the new country of the United States is because there was this idea of religious freedom, and religious freedom as distinct from religious tolerance. religious, and that is a very important piece of context when reading this letter. The idea of religious tolerance means that the state gives you the right to worship, to observe your religion, but if the state gives you that right, then the state can take it away. So if the state tolerates you, that's great for now, but when things change, the state may no longer tolerate your presence, your religious observance. What the United States does, what the Bill of Rights does, but also even going further back to the Virginia Declaration of Rights, it starts with this question of religious freedom. What is or religious liberty? And this expands through the colonies towards the beginning of the United States. And the idea of religious freedom actually is that it is one of our inalienable rights. It's one of the rights that every human being is born with, and it cannot be given or taken away by the state. And so setting up your country with religious freedom was actually a very progressive idea in 1790 and 1791 when the Bill of Rights is ratified, because as distinct from both places where people had come from and other countries in the world, the United States thinks about religion as being something that is part of who you are, and if you choose to practice it, that is for you, and no one can come and say you cannot practice your religion. It will take a different kind of, you could talk to my husband about sort of like how that has played out over the course of history, this question of religious freedom, and is the United States really a country of religious freedom, or are we really a country of religious tolerance, or something in between? But that is for a totally different experience. Instead, what we are going to do is take a look at this text, and we are going to read it in the way we read sacred texts in Judaism. Whenever I teach B'nai Mitzvah students, I always say to them, you have to read everything at least twice, preferably out loud, preferably with a chavruta, but we're on Zoom and everybody reading out loud would be cacophonous. And so because you start to see different layers as you read once and then twice, and even though this is in English, a language that presumably everybody here understands, it is 1790s English, and B, this may not be the kind of the kind of letter, the kind of language that you're familiar with. So you have to get past the language barrier, and then you can move into the question of what does this mean. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do is we're going to take 3 or 4 minutes to just read this text. If you are, well, actually everybody's on mute. So if you want to read it out loud, I definitely recommend doing that. And just the question I want you to ask yourself is in reading of sacred text, we refer to this as the pshat level, the question of what is actually going on here. And so the question I want you to ask is like, what is George Washington communicating here on the surface level? And then we'll go to the depth level. So if as you read, if you will put in the chat and I'll put the question in the chat too, what is George Washington communicating to the Jews of Newport, Rhode Island? Obviously, it says gentleman as the introduction because he's only talking to the gentleman. But so that is a function of the time, and we have left it as it is. So you can see it here. We also put the text in the chat if you want to look at it in a link. And yes, what is George Washington communicating here, just on the most basic level? Thank you all for your comments in the chat. I think you totally understand George Washington, that the United States will be a country that respects everybody's practice of religion. I saw a lot about the word equality, protection from the government. It makes the distinction between tolerance and freedom of religion. So as Sherry put in there, right, that we're not going to speak of toleration anymore. We're actually going to speak of religious freedom. So there's a lot of discussion in here about equality. Just for historical context, he is talking to, land owning men, white men, citizens of the United States. So it will take a little bit longer for us to reach a full equality, but he is definitely talking about equality of religions, that at least, as he said, the children of Abraham, right? It's not clear how he might feel about any other kinds of religions, but he is clear that the United States will be a place where people are free to practice where people are free to practice their religion in the way that they see fit. Yes, that the United States will not come in and say we are a Christian nation and we will be guided by Christianity, or we are a Jewish nation and we will be guided by Judaism. It is interesting that in our current universe, you hear people talking about the United States being a Christian nation. And if you go back to this, well, to the Bill of Rights, but also to this letter from George Washington, you can see that the original intention here is not for the United States to be a Christian nation, but for the United States to be a nation where all religions are accepted, and all religions and everybody is allowed to practice their religion as they see fit. I just want to clarify one thing about the timeline here. George Washington goes to the synagogue in Newport, and they're, I guess you would call him the synagogue president. I think he was the sexton of the synagogue, and the there is a letter, and he also gives this as an address to George Washington. And so George Washington is actually responding to the letter and the address that he's given via his visit. And if in the link that Marina has been putting in the chat, we're not going to go there because we'd need many more hours, but but if you scroll down, you can see the address that Washington is responding to, and there's actually like a lot of give and take in between what the Jews said to Washington and how he responds to them. For example, the phrase "the children of the stock of Abraham" is actually directly out of what the Jews say. The first line of that letter says, "Permit the children of the stock of Abraham." So, he's being like a good listener, and he's repeating back what he hears from them, and really taking on some of their language. Okay, so there are a lot of comments in the chat, and so that I'm having a little trouble reading them and also responding. So what I'm going to ask you to do next is I'm going to give you a couple more minutes to read this letter again, and to ask, and then the question that I want you to ask yourself is, both what are some of the images or the quotes that Washington is using to communicate this message, and why? Why would Washington use these particular images or ideas to communicate this message to the Jews of Newport? And there's nothing in this letter. This is the Drosh reading. There's nothing in this letter that says, like, I used this image because I thought it was really beautiful and special. You are going to have to think about, like, why this particular image. I want to say one thing before you read, which is that the second to last line, right? "Everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid." That is a biblical quote from the book of Micah, and it also appears in 2 other places, but this is the most direct place. And so in addition to the images that are in there, think to yourself about why would he use these images, these ideas, and why would he quote from the Bible in his discussion? Yes, in his discussion with the Jews of Newport. You can also hear that line sung in Hamilton. I also hear it sung in my brain every time I hear it. And also, I mean, it's a very famous line. It's all over the place, but also at Biden's inauguration, Amanda Gorman, the poet, also referenced this line in her inauguration poem. And so this image of the vine and the fig tree, right? Think about why has he chosen this image? Why has he chosen to quote the Bible? And why has he chosen any of the other images that are here? So I will give you a few minutes to read it a second time, even if you think you totally understand it. It's always good to read it again. I hope you are able to see. I can see a little chat going on, a little chat going on in the chat. So there are a lot of images in here. I can see there are some, these images elicit different feelings in different people. The idea that, you know, that government will protect us, that it's not about God per se, but it's about government. Ed says he reads this feeling a little bit sad because we haven't lived up to maybe the ideals that Washington is setting out. You know, that we all want to, you know, we've all, this idea that we've all sacrificed, and we've all sacrificed in order to be accepted. And right, this kind of individual right versus the communal right. We all have our own vine and fig tree. The quote is about the singular, actually, that each person will sit under their own vine and fig tree. So keep writing things in the chat if you have some questions, but I want to walk us through just a couple of pieces of this that I think are interesting when we think about it from a Jewish perspective. So you know, he's very grateful that he received this cordial welcome from Newport. Of course, as Jews, gratitude is a big part of how we approach everything. And so he's kind of reflecting back. But I wanted to start with this reflection on the days of difficulty and danger. We are clearly talking about the Revolutionary War, right? As someone said in the chat, Rhode Island is occupied by the British. So it is definitely a hearkening back to a really difficult time in American history, this time of war, this time of suffering, and now coming through and trying to build this up. But one piece of this that's actually, I think, very interesting is that in the letter and the address that the Jews do to give to George Washington, they also describe the days of difficulty and danger. But I'm going to put this in the chat, so if you don't catch it when I say it, you'll hear it, you'll be able to look at it. What they say is, those days of difficulty and danger, when the God of Israel, who delivered David, King David, from the peril of the sword, shielded your head in the day of battle. And we rejoice to think that the same Spirit who rested in the bosom of the greatly beloved Daniel, enabling him to preside over the provinces of the Babylonish Empire. I think that's probably anyway. Rests and ever will rest upon you, enabling you to discharge the arduous duties of chief magistrate in these states. They really they were all for the flowery language. So I'm going to put that in the chat just if people want to look at it. But the piece that I want to draw your attention to is actually something that a number of people picked up on in the chat, which is that George Washington references God not at all. It is really all about the protection of the state, the protection of the government. And in a letter that's about religious freedom, that seems like an appropriate thing to do. And he does a lot of mirroring of the language that the Jews of Newport give to him, except when they start going down the God path. Then he switches his language over to be talking about the protection of the government, the protection of the state, the government with the capital G. But what the Jews of Newport say to George Washington is, you know, God, the God of Israel, saved you and delivered you like he delivered King David, like God delivers Daniel in the lion's den. And basically God is the one who allowed George Washington to become to become this the president of the United States, or the chief magistrate of these states, as it will. So it's just interesting for us to note here, right, that while the Jewish community is we are using our God and our Bible, and our kind of spirituality, if you will, to frame our address to George Washington. What is being sent back to us from Washington is really, this is the government. The government's job is to provide this protection, is to ensure that you, the people of Israel, the children of the stock of Abraham, however you want to talk about them, are able to practice your religion safely. And one of the ways that George Washington is going to show that that safety is true, that he is authentic and he means it, is by not inserting his religion or his God into this text, right? We're taking God out of the discussion. Now, over time, God has seeped God's way into some of our quote unquote secular texts. Think about the Pledge of Allegiance, right? One nation under God. And other places like that. But I do think, if I can put myself in the mind of George Washington, as we often do when we are studying rabbinic texts, put ourselves in the mind of the rabbis, I think that this is a careful choice by George Washington not to make reference to God, but instead to remind the Jews that they are free to practice their religion, they are free to reference their God, and the government is going to ensure not that they can do it, because that's sort of religious toleration. The government is going to ensure that the religion piece stays out of it, right? And it is going to be the government of the United States which gives bigotry no sanction, persecution no assistance. This phrase gets used every once in a while in speeches and other moments. And so if you've ever heard a politician say these words, or anybody say these words, now you know where they came from. So when we think about the choices that George Washington is making in this text, one of them I think is that he's making a conscious choice not to mirror back to them their God language. Right. So Alan asked this question in the chat about Jews having dual loyalty issues, right? That is one of the sort of oldest it's an old anti-Semitic trope that Jews are loyal to, Jews have dual loyalty. We're loyal to, well, in when the modern state of Israel exists, we're loyal to Israel and we're loyal to America, maybe, but second, or we're loyal to some kind of like cabal of Jews. But yes. So Stuart asks, doesn't the Father of all mercies refer to God? I think it probably does, but he is not he's not mirroring back the kind of God language that exists in the letter that is being sent back, I'm sorry, in the original letter. But yes, I do think I do think that particular phrase probably does refer to God, and we're going to talk a little bit about that when we get down to the bottom. So we have this piece, and I want us to look now at this sentence that starts, for happily, the government of the United States, which gives bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. I'm sorry. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I want us to go back. These two things come together. The end of the first paragraph. If we have wisdom to make the best use of the advantages which are now favored, we cannot fail, under the just administration of good government, to become a great and happy people. So what do you think George Washington means when he says a good government. So I will ask you to put that in the chat. What does he mean when he says a good government? Okay. Oh, I just want to go back to the word demean. Demean here, demean in our language means like to debase yourself. But in the time of George Washington, it doesn't mean that. It means just to conduct yourselves. So everyone who lives under the protection should conduct themselves as good citizens. So it doesn't have the demean doesn't have the negative connotation in the time that George Washington is reading that it does now. Okay, so we're gonna think about the question of good government, right? A just and impartial government, a government that protects the rights of the people equally, a government that represents the people as opposed to a monarchy, a government that's committed to support and enforce tolerance to enable all citizens to live freely, a government to serve all people equally, all people in 17, yeah, it doesn't mean all people, but we understand. A government that will adhere to the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, a government that rules fairly and justly, a government of the people, for the people, right, by the people, beneficial. There's a lot of language of equality, fairness, the government looking out for you. I want to just offer a couple of other texts from the Jewish tradition about the way that we as Jews understand government and good government. So one of the tensions that exists in our tradition is the tension between God ruling the Jewish people and the Jewish people wanting a human ruler. And oftentimes in the Torah and in other books of the Bible, the Jewish people are like, we want a king. We want to be like everyone else, right? Like we need a human ruler. We can't just have God be our ruler. And God generally responds kind of negatively to that. And basically occasionally says like, you want to pick your own ruler, humans? Like, be my guest, but it might not go that well for you. But God does sort of intervene and talk about what kind of qualities someone should have to rule over the people. In Deuteronomy, God says, like, fine, if you set a king over yourself, that's okay, but it has to be sort of like a God ordained king, right? That God has to approve of your king. And then God says, the king has to be one of your own people. You cannot bring a king from outside. It has to be one of your own people. Those are the sort of both blessed by God in some way and being one of your own people are the things that we want a leader, not a single authority. All they knew in the time of the Torah were kings, but yes, I think maybe they would have felt differently about it in the year 2024. But this idea, right, that the ruler should come in some way from your own people, and this is potentially a complicated idea when you have multiple identities, not in the dual loyalty sense, but in the sense of we all hold many identities, Americans, Jews, gender, where we were born, any of those things. And yes, we will get to this other question about the qualities, but the question of like, what does it mean to have a ruler who's one of your own people? And I think one of the things that George Washington is communicating here is like, we are all in this together. We are all part of the American experiment. George Washington, I'm the president, but we are all going to kind of be part of this experiment together, live under the same rules, conduct ourselves in the same ways, support each other when we need it. And so in some ways, George Washington actually is responding to this question of like, what does it mean to be a leader from among your people? The other place that we have sort of the qualities that God thinks we should have is in the discussion of how we will appoint judges and officials in the book of also in the book of Deuteronomy, because that's where we get all of these nice laws, and what kind of qualities those people should have. And you will see many of the qualities that you have listed come, whether you know it or not, straight from our Torah tradition. So it says, you should appoint all these judges and people, and they will govern the people with due justice. So that's kind of whatever that means. It's the number one thing, that the people will be governed with justice. You should not judge unfairly. You should show no partiality, right? You should be a fair and impartial judge. You should not take bribes. That's a very, very important thing, because bribes, yes, like Yitro said to Moses. Yitro says to Moses, appoint these judges. Shoftim gives us kind of an expanded version of what they should be, but it's of the same idea. You shouldn't take bribes, because that will make you unjust, and that the thing you should pursue always is justice, that you should not judge rich people differently than poor people. You should not, it goes through a number of different discussions of how one should be fair, but the idea that one of the most important qualities in our leaders is a sense of justice and a sense of impartial justice. It's not, well, I'll leave it to you to say whether or not you think that value comes out in this letter or not, that sort of value of justice. But thinking about how do we choose our leaders? We choose our leaders by thinking about who is going to be, who is going to be just, who's going to be moral, who's going to be looking out for our community, not just me personally, but our wider community. And Gail has put a Rabbi Lord sermon in the chat. And so one of the beautiful things about text study is that it leads you to more texts and more texts and more texts. So you can, I will leave you that sermon on judges and leaders, and it's a great sermon. I'm looking at the time. I want us to jump now to this question of the vine and fig tree, and no one should make him afraid. So as was pointed out way earlier in the chat, this is a kind of individual text. When we read this text, it is every person, right? Each person will sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one should make them afraid. The text actually right before is perhaps a familiar text to you, that they should beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation, and they shall never again know war. So this about the vine and the fig tree is actually like it's a post-war vision, very appropriate for the time that these people are living in, having come through the Revolutionary War, that they are now living in a world where George Washington wishes for them this own vine and fig tree. So the question I have, if people will put it in the chat, is why does he choose this particular text, but also why does he choose to include a biblical text at all? He doesn't cite it, but I suspect it was well known enough to the readers of this letter that this was a text from the book of prophets, right? They don't think he's just putting together random words on a page. So why does George Washington choose this particular text and to have a biblical text included at all? I think there is something to what Linda says here, right? That Washington thinks it will have a universal appeal. It's actually a text shared by Judaism and Christianity, right? Our Bibles are the same, at least in the beginning, right? Jews are the people of the book. He's showing some kind of understanding about the Jewish people's connection to text, that we are part of the people, that we can also have land. I think, Mark, that's like a very interesting observation and probably really important here, which is to say, if you believe that the Jews can have their own vine and fig tree, it means they can have like an actual physical stake in the land of the United States. And that's not something that Jews should take for granted, that they would be welcomed in and able to tend their own vine and fig tree, vine and fig tree. Right, yes, that the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, so much of our actually American imagery comes out of that, because that's what it meant to be an educated person, was to know your Bible. Oh, interesting. So figs also represent the people of Israel, prosperity, well-being, right? Figs are one of the 7 species of fruits that are connected to Israel. The idea that the end of the Revolutionary War is a victory for all American people, including the Jews, right? They are part of the new republic, and he's and he's trying to be responsive to them, right? The children of the stock of Abraham, right? George Washington is not, as Barbara said, he's not rejecting religion, right? He also has his own religion. Having religious freedom doesn't mean no religion. It just means no established, no national religion, and this idea that we can, you can observe your religion and I can observe my religion, and we can find the places of similarity where we can be together and speak together, but we also don't have to agree exactly always on how we will observe. And I think the children of the stock of Abraham is actually also a nod to this, right? The idea that the 3 Abrahamic religions being, right, all being sort of descended from this, that the Jews we are proudly of the stock of Abraham, but other religions would claim that too. And so also connecting the Jews of Newport refer to themselves as the children of the stock of Abraham. So he's mirroring it back, but also this idea that that we can be both all together and also have our own individual ideas of what religion means. Yes, I love he's acknowledged how pleased he is with the favorable opinion of his administration, right? They wrote it's a really nice note they wrote to him, right? That they said, you're so great and we're so happy for you. You're being such a good president. Whether they were sucking up or whether they thought it, I cannot say. But they definitely, they definitely, there's a warmth in both their letter to Washington and Washington's letter back to them that, I can't point exactly to any like one word and say, this is the word that tells me that there was some warmth here, but there is and you can feel free to disagree with me in the chat, but there is a feeling of that Washington is genuine in his desire for religious freedom and his desire to make the Jews feel welcome in America. That has not always been true of the Jews in America and anywhere else over the course of time. And so I think one of the reasons that this letter, besides the fact that it's a letter from George Washington, becomes so important in the Jewish community is really that it is in the moment when America is being built. George Washington says, it is our highest ideal that you, the Jewish people, will be a full part of America, not a dual loyal part of America, not, extra outside, some like observing some weird religion, but actually like you're part of America, and that's not and that's not something that we as Jews should take for granted. It's not something that Washington is taking for granted either. Oh, Ken, I don't think I knew that Theodore Herzl invoked the fig in his depiction of the Jewish homeland. So yeah, so we have this idea of the fig, the vine and fig tree is very there's definitely a lot there. So in our last couple of minutes, because over the course of this series, we've been collecting people's thoughts. And I think when I chose this date, I was aware of the fact that it was right before an election. I was not aware of like where we would be sitting right at this very moment in terms of what's going on all around us. But I saw a very long discussion when Ed said this made him a little bit sad about, so my I will let you in on my struggle here, which is what I was going to ask is do you think America has lived up to the ideals put forth in Washington's letter? Why or why not? So I think I'm going to actually stick with that question, but I will also add a sort of sub question, because we wouldn't be Jews if we didn't ask questions and then also sub questions, which is, what do you think America needs to do in order to in order to get to this vision? If you don't think America has reached this vision, what do you think are some of the things that we might do that might get us to this place where we can all sit under our own vine and fig tree? So I'm going to give you a few minutes to write into the chat, and then they're all going to be collected. And I think Marina will maybe say more, but I think that they're all going to be collected along with all of the other writings from this series and put together as sort of like a book of questions and answers from this Hineni experience. So do you think America has lived up to the ideals? Why or why not? So it's very interesting to read. You can keep putting things in. Very interesting to read what everyone wrote. And I a lot of you brought in the thing that I was going to end this before I turn it back to Marina for a final thought, which is George Washington, for all of the ideals set forth in this letter, was obviously not a perfect person, nor were any of the founding fathers, nor any human beings. And that as a country, we've moved very far, sometimes in a good and positive and welcoming direction, and sometimes in the other direction. But I think one of the things that I hear in this letter is George Washington saying, we have come through a lot to build this American experiment, and that he doesn't want the Jewish people to feel that he wants the Jews to feel like they have a part of it, that they're a part of it, and that they have a stake in it. And I think that that is a really, really important message for us always, and especially as we sit 7 days from an election, which is we have a stake in building the kind of country that we want, the kind of country where we can feel free to practice our religion. And we know, because we're Jews and humans, that nothing will ever be perfect, but that we always strive to make things better. And in the end of his letter, he says, may the Father of all mercies scatter light and not darkness in our path, and make all of us in our several vocations useful here, and in his own due time and way everlastingly happy. That all of us, our job is not just to sit on the sidelines and wish things were better, but it's actually to find ways to make ourselves useful, because we belong to this country, and this country belongs to us, and it is only what we make it. And in the Amanda Gorman poem that she read at Biden's inauguration that references this vine and fig tree line, I just want to read to you what she says comes after it. She says, Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up if we are to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promise to glade the hill we climb, if only we dare. It's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. And this idea that the vine and the fig tree are not going to suddenly appear, but we are going to have to work for it. And so if anybody here is having, I'm going to just assume you're all voting, but if you're having any challenges, or you don't know where to go, or you don't know how to figure it out, you can email me and I will help you figure it out. You can go to vote.org, which will help you figure it out. And that will be a way that we really step into this American experiment and hopefully work to create this vision that George Washington is putting forth, and that the Bible is putting forth, and our tradition is putting forth, that we can live together in freedom, and that we can work together to really build a better place than we are in now. So with that, I will hand it over to Marina.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Rosenthal. I'm putting in the chat vote.org if you need information about voting. I see a lot of people are already mentioning that they've voted, so that's very exciting. Continue that work. So at the end of all of our Hineni, also let me spotlight myself so you can see me. At the end of all of our Hineni programs, we like to do this ritual where we raise up all the work that our community has done. So I'm going to share my screen here so you can see all the work that we've done. Over the course of the year, our neighborhood voting rights group, as well as people here at Central who are coming for Vote Forward Fridays, gathered together to write letters and postcards to get out the vote. As of this morning, we have collaboratively written 23,429 letters and postcards to get out the vote. This is huge. It definitely beats previous records held by Central Synagogue Community. I will continue to update this as today is the last day to send out a lot of these postcards and letters, so there might be a few more trickling in. So again, thank you to everyone who has participated in this civic engagement activity. Next up, in terms of our Hineni series is American Values, Religious Voices with Rabbi Dr. Andrea Weiss. This program is happening on Wednesday, November 20th. It is after the election. We thought it would be important for our community to have a place to come together and recommit to our Jewish values, whatever the election brings to us. So that program is at 6:30 and the information is in the chat. I will also send you a follow-up email with that information. The final American Sacred Texts program will be in December 4th with Rabbi Angela Buchdahl. If you are here on this call, you've already registered for it. You've either registered for in-person or virtual. Everyone's going to be able to participate, and we'll be focusing on the Great American Songbook as our last American sacred text. If you have any questions about how to get more involved in our Hineni programs or any other programs, if you are a member here and looking to get involved on our Central Square platform, which is our online platform for members with extra resources from these kinds of programs, please just email me. My email is nebrom@sensyn.org. And otherwise, thank you so much for participating today. Your comments were phenomenal. We're very excited to read through them all and help to compile a visual midrash for this session. And thank you again, Rabbi Rosenthal.
Thank you all so much. I have to go back and read all the comments in the chat because I definitely did not get to all of them, but I appreciate everyone's engagement and and all your I voted stickers. You could, if you're in Manhattan, you could take them to William Greenberg Bakery and they'll give you a free cookie. So if you don't do it for the voting, do it for the cookie. And yeah, thank you all.